For more than
We need to
25
address this
years,
tonight.
Daniel Carter had lived in the same quiet suburban neighborhood. It wasn't the biggest house on the street, nor the newest, but every brick represented sacrifice. He had purchased it after serving 12 years in the military, spending nearly every savings dollar he had to secure a peaceful place where his wife, Emma, could raise their 2 children. The neighborhood had once been everything they dreamed about. Children rode bicycles until sunset. Neighbors shared lawn equipment instead of arguments. During holidays, every family decorated together, transforming the street into something that looked like a postcard. People looked after each other's homes during vacations, collected mail, watered flowers, and treated everyone with respect. That sense of community slowly disappeared. Everything changed after the Homeowners Association elected a new board. The previous board had focused on maintaining parks, repairing sidewalks, and organizing neighborhood events. The new board had different priorities. They believed strict enforcement created higher property values, rules multiplied. Fines became more common than community newsletters. At first, Daniel paid little attention. He kept his lawn trimmed. His driveway stayed clean. His home looked almost exactly as it always had. He assumed responsible homeowners had nothing to fear. He couldn't have been more wrong. One Monday morning, while collecting his mail before work, Daniel noticed an official-looking envelope stamped with the HOA logo. He assumed it was another newsletter. Instead, it was a notice demanding payment of $200. Violation: decorative American flag displayed beyond approved dimensions. Daniel stared at the paper in disbelief. The flag had flown beside his front porch for nearly 2 decades. It wasn't oversized. It wasn't damaged. It had survived countless Independence Days, Memorial Days, Veterans Days, and family celebrations. No one had ever complained. His children had grown up saluting that flag before school on patriotic holidays. His late father had helped install the flagpole. To Daniel, it wasn't decoration. It was memory. It was respect. It was family. He carefully read every line of the notice. Failure to pay within 14 days would result in additional penalties. Repeated violations could trigger legal action. Daniel assumed there had been some mistake. After all, common sense usually solved misunderstandings. He called the HOA office. The receptionist politely informed him that all enforcement decisions came directly from the compliance committee. He requested photographs supporting the violation. None were provided. He requested clarification regarding the approved dimensions. The answer remained vague. He requested a meeting. His request was placed on a waiting list. Daniel hung up feeling confused more than angry. That evening, he measured the flag himself. The dimensions matched federal recommendations. The flagpole remained securely installed within his own property line. Nothing appeared unusual. Emma encouraged patience. Mistakes happened. Someone would surely correct it. Daniel believed her. He mailed copies of the measurements along with photographs and a respectful appeal. A week later, another envelope arrived. His appeal had been denied. An additional administrative fee had been added. Now the total exceeded $300. No explanation. No inspection. No meeting. Just another demand. For the first time, Daniel sensed something was deeply wrong. He began speaking with neighbors. Most lowered their voices before answering. Several quietly admitted they had received similar notices. One elderly widow had been fined because her flower pots supposedly exceeded approved color guidelines. Another family received penalties because children's chalk drawings remained on the driveway for several hours after a birthday party. A retired teacher had accumulated nearly $1,000 in fines over mailbox paint that looked perfectly normal. Almost everyone paid immediately. Not because they believed the fines were justified, because they feared what would happen if they refused. The HOA had attorneys. Ordinary homeowners had mortgages, jobs, and families. The imbalance intimidated people into silence. Daniel found that silence unsettling. The neighborhood he once knew had transformed into a place where neighbors whispered instead of laughed. Every conversation ended with nervous glances toward the street, as though someone might be listening. Meanwhile, new violation notices appeared with surprising frequency. One cited weeds. Daniel walked his property inch by inch. There were no weeds. He photographed every corner anyway. Another claimed his garbage bin had remained visible beyond collection day. Security camera footage proved the container had been returned within an hour. The evidence didn't matter. Another fine appeared. Then another. Administrative processing fee. Inspection fee. Late documentation review fee. Each notice sounded increasingly official. Each demanded payment. Each referenced regulations that seemed impossible to verify. Daniel visited the county record's office during his lunch break. He requested copies of the HOA's governing documents. The clerk handed him several thick binders. That evening, he spent hours reading. The language was dense, technical, complicated. Yet one detail immediately stood out. Many of the fines being issued weren't actually listed anywhere in the governing documents. Some penalties exceeded the maximum amounts authorized. Others referenced policies that appeared never to have been formally adopted. Daniel reread the pages repeatedly. Perhaps he misunderstood. So he contacted a friend from his military days who now worked as a paralegal. His friend reviewed the documents over the weekend. The conclusion surprised both of them. Several enforcement actions looked legally questionable. Not necessarily criminal, but certainly inconsistent. Daniel wasn't interested in revenge. He simply wanted fairness. He drafted another respectful letter. This time, he included specific sections from the governing documents. He politely requested documentation showing when the new fine schedules had been approved. He asked for meeting minutes, voting records, legal authority. Weeks passed. No response. Instead, another violation notice appeared. This one accused him of creating hostility toward community governance. The accusation stunned him. He hadn't protested publicly. He hadn't confronted anyone. He had merely requested documents homeowners were legally entitled to review. Emma began worrying. Their savings weren't unlimited. Every new notice increased financial pressure. Friends quietly advised Daniel to pay everything and move on. It's not worth fighting. They always win. You'll only make things worse. Daniel understood their concern, but something inside him refused to accept that asking honest questions should lead to punishment. Late one Saturday afternoon, while trimming his hedges, he noticed something unusual. Across the street, another homeowner quickly removed a citation from their mailbox before anyone else could see it. The neighbor looked embarrassed, almost ashamed. Daniel walked over. At first, the man insisted everything was fine. Then, after ensuring nobody else was nearby, he admitted he had received 7 separate fines in just 3 months. Every appeal had been denied. Every request for evidence ignored. The man quietly confessed that several other families were experiencing exactly the same thing. Nobody wanted to speak publicly. They feared retaliation. Daniel realized the problem was far bigger than his own mailbox. It wasn't about one flag, or one lawn, or one garbage bin. It was becoming a pattern. Someone or several people were using the HOA not as a community organization, but as a source of power. That evening, Daniel organized every notice, every photograph, every receipt, every letter, and every page from the governing documents into neatly labeled folders. He wasn't preparing for an argument. He was preparing to uncover the truth. Outside, the neighborhood appeared peaceful. Perfectly trimmed lawns, freshly painted fences, children playing basketball. But beneath that picture-perfect surface, something else was growing. Fear, silence, and unanswered questions. Daniel had no idea that his simple request for evidence was about to expose a system far larger than anyone imagined. The next letter wouldn't just threaten another fine. It would reveal that someone wanted him to stop asking questions. At any cost, Daniel Carter barely slept after organizing the growing stack of violation notices. Every envelope told the same story: another accusation, another fee, another demand for payment. Yet none of them answered the simple question that had been bothering him from the beginning. Who had decided these fines were legal? Every time he requested documentation, his questions disappeared into silence. Every appeal received the same generic rejection letter. Every request for evidence was ignored, as though homeowners had no right to ask where their money was going. The more Daniel thought about it, the more he realized that the fines themselves weren't the biggest problem. The real problem was the complete absence of accountability. For years, he had believed the HOA existed to protect the neighborhood. It collected dues to maintain parks, repair sidewalks, and preserve shared spaces. Instead, it now seemed obsessed with finding new reasons to punish the very people who funded it. Daniel refused to rely on assumptions. If something was wrong, he wanted facts. The following morning, before heading to work, he submitted another formal records request. This time, he carefully cited the sections of the governing documents that entitled homeowners to inspect financial statements, board meeting minutes, voting records, and enforcement policies. Everything was sent through certified mail. No one could later claim they had never received it. Days passed. Then another week. Instead of receiving the requested documents, Daniel found another violation notice in his mailbox. This one claimed that his mailbox post was inconsistent with approved community aesthetics. He stared at the letter in disbelief. The mailbox had been installed by the previous HOA board nearly 15 years earlier. It matched dozens of others throughout the neighborhood. Nothing about it had changed. Daniel drove through every street in the subdivision that evening. He photographed nearly 50 identical mailbox posts. None of those homes appeared to have received violation notices. The realization sent a chill through him. The enforcement wasn't merely strict. It appeared selective. Someone was choosing who to target. That discovery changed everything. Instead of focusing only on defending himself, Daniel began documenting the entire neighborhood. Every evening after work, he quietly photographed houses that had supposedly violated the same rules. If one homeowner received a fine for a faded fence, while 5 neighboring properties had fences in worse condition, he documented it. If someone was cited for holiday decorations staying up too long, while identical decorations remained elsewhere without consequence, he documented that too. A clear pattern slowly emerged. The same handful of families kept receiving citations. Many others with identical conditions received none. Enforcement depended less on the rules than on the homeowner. That wasn't compliance. That was favoritism. Word quietly spread. Neighbors who had once avoided Daniel began approaching him privately. Most insisted on meeting inside garages or backyards rather than in front of their homes. Fear had become deeply rooted in the community. One elderly couple shared nearly $3,000 in accumulated fines over landscaping violations that changed from month to month. A single mother explained how she had been cited because her son's basketball hoop remained visible during summer vacation, even though several other children on the street had identical hoops. A retired firefighter produced a folder thicker than Daniel's own. Inside were dozens of notices, issued over 4 years. Many contradicted one another. One inspection demanded he remove decorative stones. The next required him to replace them. He had paid every fine because he feared losing his home. Daniel listened carefully to every story. The details differed. The pattern remained identical. Vague violations. Little evidence. Automatic denials. Escalating penalties. The HOA seemed less interested in solving problems than creating revenue. As more homeowners shared documents, Daniel noticed another strange detail. Administrative fees varied dramatically. 2 homeowners receiving nearly identical violations were charged completely different amounts. No explanation appeared anywhere in the governing documents. Curious, Daniel created a spreadsheet. He listed every known violation, fine amount, inspection date, appeal result, and additional fee. After several evenings of work, the numbers became impossible to ignore. The inconsistencies weren't random. They followed no understandable system. Some people paid twice as much for identical offenses. Others received warnings instead of fines. A few influential residents appeared never to receive violations at all. The HOA board claimed to enforce rules equally. The records suggested otherwise. Daniel realized he needed official documents. Without them, everything remained circumstantial. Fortunately, one homeowner remembered attending a board meeting years earlier when attendance had been much higher. She recalled that meeting minutes were once distributed to every resident. Daniel searched through old neighborhood newsletters stored in his attic. After hours of sorting faded papers, he discovered newsletters dating back nearly 10 years. They painted a very different picture of the community. Past boards openly published financial summaries, maintenance budgets, vendor contracts, election results, committee reports. Everything had once been transparent. Then, several years earlier, the newsletters suddenly changed. Financial reports disappeared. Meeting summaries became shorter. Election information became limited. Eventually, newsletters contained almost nothing except reminders about violations and payment deadlines. Transparency had slowly vanished. Daniel found that timing interesting. Very interesting. He decided to attend the next HOA board meeting. The meeting room was nearly empty. Only 4 homeowners, besides Daniel, attended. The board members sat at the front behind neatly arranged nameplates. Everything appeared formal, professional, orderly. Yet something felt strangely controlled. When public comments opened, Daniel calmly requested copies of the financial reports and meeting minutes he had already requested by mail. The board president thanked him for his interest, then immediately claimed the documents required additional legal review before release. No timeline was provided. Another homeowner politely asked why violation fees had increased. The question received a nearly identical response. Legal review. Administrative process. Future consideration. No actual answers. Daniel carefully observed the room. Whenever difficult questions arose, board members avoided direct responses. Instead, they repeated prepared phrases that revealed nothing. The meeting ended after barely 30 minutes. As homeowners left, Daniel noticed something unexpected. A maintenance contractor quietly approached him in the parking lot. The man looked nervous. He didn't introduce himself. He simply spoke softly before walking away. He mentioned that board members often approved projects without competitive bids. He suggested Daniel examine vendor payments. Then he disappeared into the darkness before Daniel could ask another question. That brief conversation lingered in Daniel's mind. Vendor payments. He hadn't considered that possibility. Perhaps the fines weren't only about control. Perhaps they also generated money flowing somewhere homeowners couldn't see. The next day, Daniel visited the county recorder's office again. This time, he searched publicly available filings connected to the HOA. Most documents revealed nothing unusual. Annual registrations, insurance paperwork, routine filings. Then he noticed something interesting. Several maintenance contracts had been awarded to the same small company over multiple consecutive years. The company name appeared unfamiliar. Daniel searched business registration records. The owner shared the same last name as one of the current HOA board members. Perhaps it was coincidence. Perhaps not. Daniel made no assumptions. He simply copied every publicly available record. Facts mattered more than theories. That evening, he added another folder to his growing collection. Financial records, vendor contracts, public filings, inspection notices, photographic evidence, appeals. By now, his dining room resembled a small investigative office. Emma watched him work night after night. She admired his determination, but she also worried. The board had already shown they disliked questions. What would happen if they realized Daniel was uncovering connections they had never expected anyone to notice? Her concerns proved justified sooner than either of them imagined. 3 days later, Daniel arrived home to find a bright orange notice taped directly to his front door. Not placed in the mailbox. Not mailed. Taped where every passing neighbor could see it. The notice declared his property subject to immediate legal review because of multiple unresolved compliance failures. The wording was designed to humiliate. Several neighbors glanced toward the notice before quickly looking away. Daniel slowly removed the paper. Someone wanted him embarrassed. Someone wanted the neighborhood to believe he was a problem homeowner. Instead, the public notice had the opposite effect. Later that evening, another envelope appeared beneath his front door. Unlike the official HOA letters, this one contained no return address. Inside was a single handwritten sentence. "You're asking the right questions. You're just looking in the wrong place." No signature. No explanation. Only one additional item rested inside the envelope. A photocopy of what appeared to be part of an old HOA financial ledger. One entry had been circled in red ink. The amount was astonishing, and the payment description made absolutely no sense. Daniel realized his investigation had just entered an entirely different stage. Someone inside the system wanted the truth exposed. The only question left was whether they would reach him before the people trying to keep those secrets buried forever. Daniel held the anonymous envelope in his hands long after the sun had disappeared behind the rooftops. The dining room was silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock. Emma sat across from him, studying the photocopied ledger that had arrived without warning. One line had been circled in bright red ink. The payment amount was far larger than any routine maintenance expense should have been. Even stranger, the description beside it simply read, "Special Compliance Administration." It wasn't a landscaping project. It wasn't a road repair. It wasn't park maintenance. There was no explanation for where the money had gone, or why such a large payment had been approved. Daniel compared the entry to every financial document he had gathered over the previous weeks. The phrase appeared nowhere else. It was as though someone had intentionally created a category vague enough to avoid questions. He made another copy and locked the original inside a small fireproof safe. If someone had risked exposing internal records, Daniel wasn't going to lose the evidence. The following morning, he drove to the county recorder's office before work. He wasn't looking for accusations. He was looking for facts. Hours passed as he searched public records, vendor registrations, tax filings, and corporate documents. Most led nowhere. Then one detail stopped him cold. The company receiving several large, Special Compliance Administration Payments had been registered only a few months before the new HOA board took office. Its listed office address belonged to a small commercial building across town. During lunch, Daniel drove there. Instead of finding a busy office, he found an aging strip mall with faded signs and empty storefronts. The suite number listed on the registration belonged to a mailbox rental business. No employees. No office. No equipment. Only a rented mailbox. That discovery raised more questions than answers. Legitimate contractors usually had warehouses, equipment, trucks, or at least an office. This company seemed to exist only on paper. Daniel photographed the location and quietly returned home. That evening, he received another unexpected visitor. A soft knock echoed through the front door just after dusk. When Daniel opened it, he found the retired firefighter who had previously shared his own stack of HOA violations. The man looked unusually serious. Without saying much, he handed Daniel another folder. Inside were years of old HOA newsletters, election notices, and budget reports that he had saved since moving into the neighborhood. "I figured someone should finally put them to good use," he said before quietly leaving. Daniel spent the next several hours comparing old budgets to recent financial reports. A troubling pattern emerged. Years ago, nearly 80% of HOA income had gone toward maintaining the community. Road repairs, playground equipment, pool maintenance, landscaping, tree trimming, seasonal events. As the new board gained control, those numbers shifted dramatically. Maintenance spending steadily declined. Meanwhile, administrative expenses and compliance costs increased every single year. Residents paid more. The neighborhood received less. Even more disturbing, fines had nearly quadrupled over 5 years. Yet sidewalks remained cracked. Streetlights stayed broken. The community clubhouse needed repairs that had been postponed repeatedly. The money clearly wasn't returning to the neighborhood. Daniel created charts showing every increase, every unexplained payment, and every budget change. He wasn't building a conspiracy theory. He was building a timeline. Facts spoke louder than opinions. Word continued spreading quietly through the neighborhood. More homeowners came forward. Some carried folders. Others brought photographs. Several simply shared stories they had been too afraid to tell before. An elderly widow revealed she had refinanced part of her home simply to pay accumulated HOA penalties. A young couple admitted they had canceled plans to adopt a child because thousands of dollars had disappeared into unexpected fines and legal fees. A disabled veteran explained that repeated violations had pushed him dangerously close to foreclosure. None of these families looked like rule breakers. They looked exhausted. They had spent years believing they were isolated. Now they realized dozens of neighbors had experienced the same treatment. Daniel suggested everyone document only facts. No rumors. No insults. No emotional accusations. Every photograph needed dates. Every letter required copies. Every payment needed receipts. Truth would be strongest if it relied on evidence rather than anger. Within 2 weeks, nearly 30 homeowners had privately contributed documents. The evidence filled multiple storage boxes. Patterns became impossible to ignore. Entire streets experienced waves of violations immediately after board meetings. Families who questioned fines suddenly received more inspections. Residents serving on former committees appeared disproportionately targeted. Meanwhile, several homes belonging to close friends of board members repeatedly escaped enforcement despite obvious rule violations visible from the street. Daniel carefully avoided drawing conclusions. Instead, he organized everything into categories: selective enforcement, financial irregularities, procedural violations, unauthorized fee increases, conflict of interest. Each section continued growing. Then another surprise arrived. One afternoon, Daniel received a phone call from an investigative reporter at the local newspaper. The reporter explained that multiple homeowners had independently mentioned Daniel's research. At first, Daniel hesitated. His goal had never been publicity. He simply wanted fairness. The reporter assured him that no article would be published without verified documentation. Daniel agreed to an off-the-record meeting. Over coffee, he shared only publicly available records and copies of documents homeowners had authorized him to use. The reporter listened carefully. Rather than focusing on dramatic accusations, she became interested in something much simpler. Why had so many residents been denied access to financial records they were legally entitled to inspect? That question alone justified further investigation. Within days, she began submitting her own public records requests. Unlike frightened homeowners, journalists often knew exactly which documents governments and organizations were obligated to produce. Pressure slowly began building. The HOA board appeared to notice. Violation notices against Daniel suddenly stopped. For the first time in months, his mailbox remained empty. The silence felt unusual, almost strategic. Emma sensed it too. She reminded Daniel that people protecting secrets often became quiet before making their next move. Her instincts proved accurate. The following week, every homeowner received notice of a special emergency HOA meeting. The stated purpose involved updating compliance procedures. Attendance was strongly encouraged. Rumors spread throughout the neighborhood. Some believed new fines were coming. Others suspected budget increases. Daniel simply waited. On meeting night, something remarkable happened. Instead of the usual handful of attendees, more than 100 homeowners filled the community hall. People who hadn't attended meetings in years quietly took seats. Entire families came together. The atmosphere felt different. Not angry. Determined. The board members appeared visibly surprised. They had grown accustomed to nearly empty meetings. Now nearly every chair was occupied. As the meeting began, the board president attempted to move quickly through the agenda. Routine approvals, committee updates, maintenance announcements. Then public comments opened. Daniel stood calmly. He carried a neatly organized binder. No dramatic speeches. No raised voice. Only documented questions. He requested explanations for inconsistent enforcement records. He requested clarification regarding vendor payments. He requested confirmation that homeowners would finally receive complete financial statements. One by one, other residents stood behind him. An elderly widow asked about unexplained administrative fees. The retired firefighter questioned selective inspections. The single mother asked why identical violations produced different penalties. Each homeowner spoke respectfully. Each relied on documents. Each asked simple questions. The board struggled to answer. Prepared responses that had once ended discussions now seemed painfully inadequate before a room full of informed homeowners. For the first time, silence belonged to the board, not the residents. The meeting ended abruptly, without resolving a single major question. As homeowners left, conversations continued throughout the parking lot. People exchanged phone numbers. They formed small groups. They volunteered to compare records and share documents. Years of fear had begun transforming into cooperation. Late that night, Daniel returned home physically exhausted but quietly hopeful. He believed the hardest part might finally be over. He was wrong. When he walked into his driveway the next morning, something immediately caught his attention. His front yard looked untouched. His house looked normal. But taped to his garage door was another envelope. This one wasn't anonymous. It carried official HOA letterhead. Inside was a notice unlike any Daniel had received before. The board had scheduled a disciplinary hearing. The stated purpose was not unpaid fines, not landscaping, not mailbox violations. The hearing accused Daniel himself of attempting to damage the reputation of the association. Attached to the notice was a recommendation that his voting rights be suspended permanently. Daniel looked down at the paperwork and understood exactly what it meant. The investigation had reached its breaking point. The board was no longer trying to defend its actions. It was trying to silence the man asking the questions. Daniel stood in his driveway, reading the disciplinary notice over and over again. The accusations weren't about unpaid fines. They weren't about landscaping. They weren't about property maintenance. The HOA board was now accusing him of damaging the association's reputation, simply because he had requested records, compared documents, and encouraged homeowners to understand their own governing rules. It wasn't really a disciplinary hearing. It was intimidation. For a brief moment, Daniel considered walking away. The past several months had taken an emotional toll on his family. Even though Emma never complained, he knew she carried the same worries he did. Every unexpected knock on the door made her uneasy. Every official envelope caused a knot in her stomach. Their children had noticed the tension too. The peaceful neighborhood they had always loved no longer felt quite the same. But then Daniel remembered the elderly widow who had refinanced her home just to pay mounting HOA penalties. He remembered the disabled veteran who had nearly lost everything. He remembered the young couple who had postponed adopting a child because they could no longer afford the unexpected legal fees. If he walked away now, nothing would change. The same system would continue targeting families who lacked the resources to fight back. That realization gave him clarity. Instead of preparing for a confrontation, Daniel prepared for transparency. He contacted every homeowner who had contributed documents over the previous weeks. No emotional speeches. No calls for revenge. Only a simple invitation. If you believe homeowners deserve honest answers, attend the hearing. The response exceeded every expectation. Word spread throughout the neighborhood faster than any HOA newsletter ever had. Residents who had remained silent for years decided they had seen enough. Many who had quietly paid unfair fines now realized they were not alone. On the evening of the disciplinary hearing, the community clubhouse reached capacity long before the meeting began. Extra chairs were brought in. People stood along the walls. Others waited outside, near open windows, simply to hear what would happen. The board members entered, expecting another routine meeting. Instead, they found a room filled with homeowners carrying folders, photographs, receipts, and copies of governing documents. For the first time in years, the balance of power had shifted. The hearing began with formal procedures. The board attempted to present Daniel as someone creating unnecessary conflict within the community. But before long, something unexpected happened. Daniel politely requested permission to respond. He placed a thick binder on the table. Inside were carefully organized sections. Every violation notice. Every certified letter. Every appeal. Every photograph. Every public record. Every budget comparison. Every timeline. Every document had dates, references, and supporting evidence. There were no accusations unsupported by facts. No personal attacks. Only documented inconsistencies. He demonstrated how identical properties had received completely different enforcement. He showed that several fine amounts exceeded limits contained in the governing documents. He presented evidence that numerous homeowner requests for financial records had gone unanswered despite governing policies requiring reasonable access. He outlined the dramatic increase in administrative expenses alongside declining neighborhood maintenance. He introduced public business registration records, showing connections between vendors and individuals associated with the board. He never claimed guilt. He simply asked for explanations. The room remained silent. One by one, homeowners requested permission to speak. The elderly widow described years of financial hardship caused by repeated penalties. The retired firefighter shared records documenting contradictory inspection notices. The single mother explained how selective enforcement had made her afraid to let her son play basketball outside. The disabled veteran quietly described the emotional burden of wondering whether another fine might push him toward foreclosure. None of them shouted. None of them interrupted. Their calm honesty carried more weight than anger ever could. As the evening continued, even homeowners who had never received violations began asking questions. If enforcement had been fair, why were records so difficult to obtain? If budgets were properly managed, why had transparency steadily disappeared? If vendor relationships were appropriate, why not disclose them openly? The board struggled to provide clear answers. Prepared statements that had worked for years no longer satisfied a room filled with informed residents. The meeting extended late into the evening. Eventually, several homeowners proposed an independent financial audit. Others requested a formal review of every fine issued during the past 5 years. According to the governing documents, enough homeowner signatures could require both actions. Clipboards began circulating through the room. By the end of the meeting, more than the required number of homeowners had signed. The board had no choice. The audit moved forward. Over the following weeks, independent professionals examined financial records, vendor contracts, meeting minutes, and enforcement procedures. Their findings confirmed many of the concerns homeowners had documented. Numerous fines had been imposed without proper procedural support. Administrative fees had been inconsistently applied. Certain vendor relationships had not been fully disclosed. Financial oversight had fallen well below acceptable standards. The investigation did not accuse every board member of intentional misconduct. However, it concluded that governance had become deeply flawed and required immediate correction. The report recommended significant reforms. Soon afterward, several board members resigned. Others chose not to seek re-election. A special community election was scheduled. For the first time in many years, participation reached record levels. Homeowners who had once ignored HOA meetings now understood how important involvement truly was. A new board was elected with one clear promise: transparency. Within months, financial reports returned to community newsletters. Meeting agendas were published in advance. Minutes became available online. Homeowners could review budgets without submitting repeated requests. Violation procedures were rewritten to ensure consistency. Independent appeal panels replaced automatic denials. Most importantly, many questionable fines were reviewed. Numerous homeowners received refunds or account credits for penalties determined to have been improperly issued. While no amount of money could erase years of stress, the acknowledgement meant everything to families who had long felt powerless. The atmosphere throughout the neighborhood slowly transformed. Children once again played freely on sidewalks. Neighbors stopped avoiding one another. Community events returned. Holiday decorating contests replaced compliance inspections. People greeted each other instead of wondering who might receive the next violation notice. One Saturday morning, Daniel stood on his front porch beside the same American flag that had started the entire ordeal. The flag still waved gently in the breeze. It had never been the real issue. The issue had always been something much larger. Communities thrive when people trust one another. That trust disappears when power exists without accountability. Daniel had never set out to become the face of a neighborhood movement. He had simply refused to stop asking reasonable questions. His determination reminded everyone that fairness rarely arrives on its own. It requires ordinary people willing to remain respectful, patient, and persistent, even when doing so feels uncomfortable. Months later, during the neighborhood's annual community picnic, families gathered in the park once again. Children laughed as they chased one another across freshly maintained grass. Neighbors shared homemade food. Music played through speakers near the gazebo. The atmosphere resembled the neighborhood Daniel had fallen in love with decades earlier. Several residents quietly thanked him for refusing to give up. Daniel always responded the same way in his own mind. He hadn't changed the neighborhood alone. The community changed because ordinary people stopped believing they were powerless. The greatest lesson wasn't that corruption could exist. The greatest lesson was that honesty, documentation, and unity could overcome it. When neighbors choose courage over fear and facts over rumors, even the strongest systems of intimidation eventually collapse. The flag beside Daniel's porch continued to wave exactly as it had for 20 years. This time, however, it symbolized more than family tradition. It stood as a reminder that justice doesn't always arrive quickly, but when ordinary people stand together with integrity, it has a way of finding its way home.